Welcome to my channel, The Resting Mind. Tonight, as you settle in, I want to explore something you've probably experienced but never fully understood. Have you ever gone to bed frustrated by a problem that seemed impossible, only to wake up the next morning with the answer clear in your mind? Perhaps it was a creative dilemma you'd wrestled with for days, or a difficult decision that suddenly felt obvious after a night's rest, or even a technical puzzle that had stumped you completely, and yet somehow, in those first quiet moments after opening your eyes, the solution was simply there, waiting for you, as if it had always been obvious. This phenomenon is so common that we have a phrase for it: sleeping on it. We tell each other to sleep on decisions, to let problems rest overnight, to wait until morning before acting. It's advice passed down through generations, embedded in folk wisdom across cultures, and yet most of us don't really know why it works. We treat it as a mystery, a quirk of the mind, something that happens but can't quite be explained. But what if I told you that this isn't a quirk at all? What if the reason you wake up smarter than you fell asleep is because your brain is doing something remarkable while you rest, something that your conscious mind cannot do, something that requires the specific conditions of sleep to happen at all? Tonight, we're going to explore why this happens. We're going to look at what your brain is actually doing during those hours when you're unconscious, and why those processes lead to insights that elude you during waking life. This is a journey into the hidden intelligence of sleep, into the mechanisms that turn your sleeping hours into a problem-solving laboratory, and into the strange territory where consciousness fades and a different kind of thinking begins. If you enjoy these quiet explorations of the mind, these gentle journeys through neuroscience and wonder, please consider liking this video. It helps others find these calm spaces for curious thought. And now, let's begin. The mystery we're examining tonight is deeply personal. You've lived it. Everyone has. You sit at your desk, or pace your room, or stare at a screen, trying to force a solution into being. You apply logic, you run through possibilities, you exhaust every angle you can consciously access, and nothing works. The problem remains stubbornly unsolved. Frustration builds, hours pass. Eventually, exhausted, you give up and go to bed. And then, in the morning, sometimes in those first few moments of waking, sometimes while brushing your teeth or making coffee, the answer simply appears. Not gradually, not through deliberate thought, but all at once, complete and clear. You might even feel a little foolish for not seeing it before, because now it seems so obvious, so simple, as if the solution had been hiding in plain sight all along. But here's what's strange. You didn't work on the problem during the night. You weren't aware of thinking about it. You were unconscious, absent, gone from your own mental processes, and yet something was happening. Something was working. Your brain, in your absence, was doing what your conscious mind could not. Why? What is happening in those hours of darkness that makes your sleeping brain more capable than your waking one, at least for certain kinds of problems? What mechanisms are at play? And why does the solution arrive not during sleep itself, but in that liminal moment of awakening, that threshold between unconsciousness and full awareness?
These questions have puzzled humans for centuries, and only in the last few decades have we begun to understand the answers. What we've discovered is both beautiful and strange. Your sleeping mind is not resting at all. It is working, reorganizing, exploring, connecting ideas in ways that your conscious thought actively prevents. Sleep, it turns out, is not the absence of cognition. It is a different kind of cognition, one that operates by different rules, one that can do what waking thought cannot. To understand this, we need to begin by questioning an assumption that most of us carry without even realizing it. It seems simple, but most of us misunderstand what sleep actually is. We think of it as rest, as shutdown, as the brain taking a break from the work of thinking. This makes intuitive sense, doesn't it? You close your eyes, you lose consciousness, your body relaxes, and everything just stops. The lights go out. The factory shuts down for the night. Your mind, exhausted from the day's labor, finally gets a break.
But this assumption is wrong, completely, fundamentally wrong. Your brain during sleep is not shut down. It is not resting in the way you think of rest. In fact, in some ways, your brain is more active during sleep than during many waking activities. If you were to measure the electrical activity of a sleeping brain, you would find storms of neural firing, waves of coordinated activity sweeping across the cortex, billions of neurons communicating in intricate patterns. The sleeping brain is loud, busy, alive with processing. And yet, we assume silence. We assume absence. This misconception runs deep, and it shapes how we think about sleep's value. If sleep is just rest, just recovery time for a tired machine, then the idea that you could solve problems while sleeping seems almost magical, like expecting your car to repair itself overnight while parked in the garage.
But sleep is not like parking a car. It is more like sending the car to a specialized workshop where mechanics with unique tools can access systems that are locked during normal operation. During sleep, your brain enters modes of processing that are simply unavailable while you're awake. It's not that your waking brain is inferior, it's that it's designed for different tasks. Waking consciousness is optimized for focused attention, for logical sequences, for responding to immediate demands. Sleep consciousness, if we can even call it consciousness, is optimized for something else entirely: integration, reorganization, and exploration of distant connections. This idea challenges our everyday experience. We are conscious beings. We identify with our waking awareness. The idea that our unconscious mind, operating without our knowledge or consent, is capable of sophisticated problem solving feels strange, almost threatening. It suggests that you, the conscious you, are not the only intelligent system in your head. There is another intelligence, one that works in the dark, one that you can only access indirectly through its outputs, insights, intuitions, solutions that appear fully formed. For centuries, humans have noticed this. Ancient cultures spoke of wisdom arriving in dreams, of gods or spirits delivering answers while mortals slept. Greek philosophers debated the nature of dreams and their relationship to truth. In the Middle Ages, people believed that sleep brought the soul closer to divine knowledge. These were attempts to explain the undeniable phenomenon: sleep changes what you know and how you think. But without the tools of modern neuroscience, without the ability to peer into the living brain and watch what it does during sleep, these explanations remained speculative, metaphorical. The mechanism was invisible. All we had was the output: wake up, no more. The process in between was a black box, a mystery wrapped in unconsciousness.
And so, for a very long time, sleep remained one of the great unsolved puzzles of human biology. Why do we spend a third of our lives unconscious? What could possibly be so important that evolution would make us vulnerable, immobile, and unaware for hours every single day? If sleep were truly just rest, you'd expect evolution to optimize it away, to find more efficient methods of recovery that didn't require such profound disconnection from the environment. But sleep persists. It persists across species, across evolutionary lineages. Bird sleep, reptile sleep, fish sleep, even fruit fly sleep. This universality tells us something important. Sleep is not optional. It is not a luxury. It is a fundamental biological necessity, as essential as food or water. And if it's that essential, then it must be doing something that cannot be done any other way. For centuries, scientists tried to figure out what that something was. In the 19th century, sleep was often viewed as a purely restorative process, a time when the body replenished energy stores and repaired tissues. This was partially correct, of course. Your body does perform maintenance during sleep, but it couldn't explain the vivid mental experiences of dreams, the complex narratives and emotions that arise during sleep. If sleep were only about physical restoration, why would the brain bother generating such elaborate inner worlds? In the early 20th century, Sigmund Freud famously proposed that dreams were the royal road to the unconscious, symbolic expressions of repressed desires and conflicts. This was a psychological explanation, not a biological one, and while it captured the public imagination, it didn't answer the question of mechanism. Why would the brain need to express repressed content symbolically during sleep? What function did that serve?
It wasn't until 1953 that a crucial discovery changed everything. Eugene Aserinsky, a graduate student working in Nathaniel Kleitman's lab at the University of Chicago, was studying the sleep of infants. He noticed something odd. At certain times during sleep, the infants' eyes moved rapidly beneath their closed eyelids. This was strange, because sleep was supposed to be a quiet, still state. Why would the eyes be moving? Aserinsky and Kleitman decided to investigate further. They attached electrodes to adult volunteers and recorded their brain activity throughout the night. What they found astonished them. Sleep was not a uniform state. It had distinct stages, each with its own characteristic brainwave patterns. And during those periods of rapid eye movement, what they called REM sleep, the brain's electrical activity looked almost identical to waking activity. It was as if the brain were awake, but the body was paralyzed, and the eyes were darting around, tracking something that wasn't there. This was the first hint that sleep was not a single state, but a complex architecture of different modes, each potentially serving different functions. The discovery of REM sleep opened the door to understanding sleep's true nature, but it also raised more questions than it answered. What was the brain doing during REM sleep? Why did it look awake on an EEG, but produce no conscious awareness? And what about the other stages of sleep, the non-REM stages, where brain activity slowed into deep, rolling waves? Over the following decades, researchers mapped out the sleep cycle in exquisite detail. They discovered that a normal night of sleep consists of multiple 90-minute cycles, each progressing through stages of light sleep, deep, slow-wave sleep, and then into REM sleep. As the night goes on, the proportion of REM sleep increases. Your first REM period might last only 10 minutes, but by the end of the night, you might be in REM for 40 minutes or more at a stretch.
This pattern suggested that REM sleep was doing something cumulative, something that required time to complete. But what? In the 1960s and 70s, researchers began to suspect that REM sleep was involved in memory. They noticed that people deprived of REM sleep had trouble learning new tasks. Animals deprived of REM couldn't navigate mazes as well. There seemed to be a connection between REM sleep and the consolidation of memories, the process by which short-term experiences become stable, long-term knowledge. But even this didn't fully explain the phenomenon we're exploring tonight. Memory consolidation could account for retaining information, but it didn't explain insight, creativity, or problem-solving. Remembering facts is one thing, generating new solutions is another. If sleep were only about transferring memories from temporary storage to permanent storage, you wouldn't expect to wake up with answers you didn't have before. You'd expect to remember what you already learned, but not to know something new. And yet, people did wake up knowing something new. Musicians woke up with melodies, scientists woke up with theories, writers woke up with plot solutions. This wasn't just memory, this was creation. The puzzle remained: how does sleep create knowledge? And then, in the last 2 decades, neuroscientists began to piece together the answer, and it turned out to be more remarkable than anyone had imagined. The reason you wake up smarter than you fell asleep is rooted in a process called synaptic homeostasis, and it's one of the most elegant mechanisms in all of neuroscience. To understand it, you need to know something fundamental about how your brain works. Your brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons, each one connected to thousands of others through junctions called synapses. These synapses are not fixed, they are constantly changing in strength. When you learn something, when you have an experience, certain synapses strengthen. This is the physical basis of memory. Stronger synapses mean stronger connections between neurons, which means that certain patterns of activity become more likely to recur. This is how you remember a face, a fact, a skill. The neural pathway has been reinforced.
But here's the problem. If every experience strengthens synapses, and synapses only ever get stronger, then over time, your brain would become oversaturated. Every connection would be maxed out, every synapse as strong as it can be. There would be no room for new learning, no way to distinguish important information from noise. The signal would be drowned in a sea of equally strong connections. Your brain would be like a library where every book is marked as equally important, useless for finding what you actually need. This is where sleep comes in. During sleep, specifically during the deep, slow-wave sleep that dominates the first half of the night, your brain undergoes a process of synaptic downscaling. It weakens synapses, not randomly, but selectively. Synapses that were only weakly activated during the day, that don't carry important information, get weakened. Synapses that were strongly and repeatedly activated, that encode meaningful memories, are preserved or even strengthened further. This is homeostasis, bringing the system back into balance. During the day, your brain accumulates synaptic strength, building up connections in response to every experience. During the night, it prunes away the less important connections, making room for what matters. Think of it like a sculptor starting with a block of marble. The day adds material. Every experience, every thought, every sensation adds to the block. But the sculpture itself, the meaningful form, emerges not from addition, but from subtraction. Sleep is the chisel that removes the excess, revealing the shape beneath. This process has a profound consequence. By weakening unimportant connections and preserving important ones, sleep increases the signal-to-noise ratio in your brain. The patterns that matter become clearer. The memories that are meaningful stand out more sharply against the background. You don't just remember better after sleep, you understand better because the essential structure of what you learned has been clarified.
Stand out more sharply against the background. You don't just remember better after sleep, you understand better because the essential structure of what you learned has been clarified. But this is still only the first piece of the puzzle. Synaptic homeostasis explains how sleep makes existing knowledge clearer, but it doesn't yet explain how sleep generates new insights. For that, we need to look at what's happening with your memories during the night, and it's something utterly strange. While you sleep, your brain is replaying your memories, not metaphorically, literally. During slow-wave sleep, the hippocampus, a small seahorse-shaped structure deep in your brain that is crucial for memory formation, spontaneously reactivates the neural patterns that were active during the day. If you learned a route through a maze, the neurons that fired when you walked that route will fire again during sleep, in the same sequence, but much faster, sometimes 10 to 20 times faster than real time. This was first discovered in rats. Researchers recorded the activity of neurons in rats' hippocampi as the animals ran through mazes, then continued recording while the rats slept. What they found was astonishing. The exact same sequences of neural firing that occurred during maze exploration occurred again during sleep, compressed in time. The rat's brain was replaying the experience over and over, like a video on fast forward. And this replay wasn't random. It happened during sharp wave ripples, brief bursts of high-frequency activity in the hippocampus that occurred during slow-wave sleep. Each ripple seemed to trigger a replay event. Over the course of a night, a memory might be replayed hundreds or even thousands of times. Why? What's the point of replaying a memory so many times?
The answer is consolidation. Each replay strengthens the synaptic connections that encode the memory. But it's not just about making the memory stronger. It's also about transferring the memory from the hippocampus, which is good for rapid short-term learning, to the cortex, which is better for long-term storage and integration with existing knowledge. The hippocampus is like a temporary notepad, and the cortex is like a filing system. Replay is the process of transferring notes from the pad into the files, making them part of your permanent knowledge base. This has been confirmed in humans. In one famous study, researchers had people learn to navigate a virtual environment, then scanned their brains while they slept. The same brain regions that were active during navigation showed activity during sleep. The brain was replaying the route. In another study, people learned a sequence of finger movements, like playing a melody on a piano. After sleep, their performance improved, even though they hadn't practiced. Brain imaging showed that the motor cortex, which controls movement, was active during sleep, replaying the sequence. The brain was practicing without the body. And it's not just motor skills. Language learning shows the same pattern. People who study vocabulary before sleep show better retention than those who study at other times, and brain activity during sleep reflects the replaying of the words they learned. But here's where it gets interesting for our question about problem solving. Memory replay doesn't just strengthen individual memories, it also allows the brain to find patterns across memories, to integrate new information with old, to discover connections that weren't obvious during waking experience.
Imagine you spent the day learning about different types of trees. During the day, each tree is a separate experience, a separate memory. But during sleep, as your brain replays these memories, it can compare them, noticing similarities and differences. It can abstract out the features that define treeness, separating essential characteristics from irrelevant details. This is how you move from memorizing individual examples to understanding categories, concepts, principles. This integrative replay is crucial for problem solving because most problems require you to see connections between things that seemed unrelated. A solution is often just a recombination of existing knowledge in a new way, and sleep, through its replay mechanisms, creates opportunities for those recombinations to occur. But this still isn't the complete answer. Replay and consolidation during slow-wave sleep explain how memories are strengthened and integrated, but they don't explain the creative leaps, the sudden insights, the solutions that involve seeing a problem from an entirely new angle. For that, we need to look at what happens during REM sleep and why your conscious mind might actually be an obstacle to solving certain kinds of problems. To understand why your conscious mind can be an obstacle to problem solving, you need to understand what your conscious mind is good at and what it's not good at. Your waking consciousness is dominated by the prefrontal cortex, the region of your brain located right behind your forehead. This is the brain's executive center, responsible for planning, decision-making, logical reasoning, and inhibitory control. When you're awake and alert, your prefrontal cortex is highly active, exerting top-down control over the rest of your brain. It keeps you focused on goals, suppresses irrelevant thoughts, and enforces logical consistency.
This is enormously valuable. Without prefrontal control, you'd be at the mercy of every distraction, every impulse, every stray thought. You couldn't hold a conversation, couldn't work toward long-term goals, couldn't distinguish reality from fantasy. The prefrontal cortex is what makes you a functional adult, capable of navigating complex social and intellectual environments. But this control comes at a cost. The prefrontal cortex doesn't just suppress distractions, it also suppresses unlikely ideas. It filters out thoughts that don't fit with your current assumptions, that violate logic, that seem irrelevant. This is usually helpful. Most unlikely ideas are indeed useless. But sometimes, the solution to a problem lies in an idea that seems, on the surface, illogical or irrelevant, and your prefrontal cortex, doing its job, will shut that idea down before you even consciously notice it. Think about a problem you've struggled with. Let's say you're trying to figure out how to rearrange furniture in a small room. Your conscious mind works methodically. Move the couch here, the chair there, check if there's enough space, reject the configuration, try again. This is logical, systematic, prefrontal-driven thinking. But what if the solution requires doing something counterintuitive, like putting the largest piece of furniture in the center instead of against a wall? Your conscious mind might reject that possibility immediately because it violates a heuristic you've learned. Large furniture goes on the perimeter. But during REM sleep, something remarkable happens. The prefrontal cortex goes quiet. Its activity drops dramatically. At the same time, other brain regions become highly active, particularly areas involved in emotion, memory, and sensory processing. Without the prefrontal cortex enforcing logical constraints, your sleeping brain can explore ideas that your waking mind would instantly dismiss.
This is why dreams are so bizarre. Without prefrontal inhibition, associations flow freely. A cat can turn into a jazz musician because both share some distant semantic connection in your memory network. And without the prefrontal cortex enforcing category boundaries, the connection is allowed to surface. This seems like chaos, and in a sense it is, but it's also a kind of freedom. Freedom from the rigid pathways of logical thought. And sometimes, within that chaos, your brain stumbles onto connections that are actually useful. The history of science and art is filled with examples of this. Dmitry Mendeleev, the Russian chemist, spent years trying to organize the known chemical elements into a coherent system. He tried arrangement after arrangement, but nothing quite worked. Then in 1869, after days of frustration, he fell asleep at his desk. In his dream, he saw the elements arranging themselves into a table, each in its proper place, according to atomic weight and properties. When he woke, he wrote down what he'd seen, and the result was the periodic table,
one of the most important organizing principles in all of chemistry. Was this magic? No. Mendelev's brain had all the necessary information. He knew the properties of the elements, their atomic weights, their chemical behaviors. What he lacked was the right way to connect that information. During sleep, with his prefrontal cortex offline, his brain was free to try unusual arrangements, to make connections that didn't fit his waking assumptions. The dream didn't give him new data, it gave him a new pattern. Or consider August Kekulé, the German chemist, who discovered the ring structure of benzene. He had been puzzling over the molecular structure of benzene for months. The known atomic composition didn't fit with any linear structure. Then, one afternoon, he dozed off in front of the fire. He dreamed of a snake seizing its own tail, forming a circle. When he woke, he realized benzene wasn't a chain, it was a ring. This insight transformed organic chemistry.
Again, the information was already there. Kekulé knew the chemical properties of benzene. What he needed was to break free from the assumption that molecules were linear chains, to consider a circular structure. His waking mind, constrained by conventional thinking, couldn't make that leap. His dreaming mind could. Paul McCartney famously woke up with the melody of Yesterday fully formed in his mind. He'd been working on it, but couldn't find the right tune. In sleep, freed from conscious effort, his brain generated it. He was so convinced he must have heard it somewhere before, because it arrived so complete, so effortlessly, that he spent weeks playing it for other musicians, asking if they recognized it. They didn't. It was his, created by his sleeping brain. These are famous examples, but the phenomenon isn't limited to geniuses. Laboratory studies confirm that ordinary people show improved problem-solving after sleep, specifically on tasks that require insight rather than logic. One well-known study used what's called the number reduction task. Participants were taught a tedious procedure for solving a series of math problems. Unbeknownst to them, there was a hidden shortcut that, once noticed, made the task trivial. Most people, working on the task while awake, never noticed the shortcut. But if they slept between training and testing, the likelihood of discovering the shortcut more than doubled. Sleep didn't teach them anything new. It allowed them to see what was already there. Another study looked at verbal insight problems, puzzles where you have to find a word that connects three other words. For example, what word goes with pine, crab, and sauce? The answer is apple. Pineapple, crabapple, applesauce. These problems require you to search through your semantic memory for distant connections. After sleep, particularly after REM sleep, people's performance on these problems improved significantly. Sleep enhanced their ability to find remote associations.
Why? What is REM sleep doing that enables this? The answer lies in the neurotransmitter environment of the brain during REM. During waking, your brain is bathed in neurotransmitters like norepinephrine, serotonin, and acetylcholine, which regulate attention, mood, and arousal. But during REM sleep, norepinephrine and serotonin levels drop to nearly zero. Acetylcholine, however, surges. This creates a unique neurochemical state. Without norepinephrine, which normally helps maintain focused attention and suppresses irrelevant neural activity, your brain's activity becomes less constrained. Neurons that wouldn't normally communicate can interact. Associations that are weak or distant can activate each other. The brain's semantic network, normally tightly organized, loosens up. At the same time, high acetylcholine levels enhance activity in the hippocampus and other memory regions, keeping memory retrieval active even as the prefrontal cortex is offline. So you have a brain that is actively retrieving memories, but without the executive control that usually filters those memories for relevance. The result is a state ideally suited for exploring the space of possible ideas, for making connections that would never occur during waking thought. Your brain is essentially trying out random combinations, and occasionally, one of those combinations turns out to be useful. Think of it like this. Your waking mind is like a person searching for a lost item by carefully checking each place it might logically be. This works if the item is where it should be, but if it's somewhere unexpected, you might never find it, because you'll never think to look there. Your sleeping mind, by contrast, is like someone wandering randomly through the house, opening every drawer, looking in every corner, without any particular plan. Most of what they find is junk, but occasionally they stumble onto the lost item, precisely because they weren't limiting themselves to logical places.
This is why sleep helps with problems that have non-obvious solutions, problems where the answer involves stepping outside conventional categories. It's not that sleep makes you smarter in a general sense. It's that sleep removes the constraints that make certain kinds of intelligence impossible. But here's the thing, this doesn't happen uniformly throughout the night. The architecture of sleep matters. If you've ever looked at a sleep chart or worn a sleep tracker, you've seen that sleep is not a flat, uniform state. It's a cycle, a rhythm, a journey through different stages, and the timing of these stages is crucial for understanding when and how problem-solving occurs during sleep. A typical sleep cycle lasts about 90 minutes. It begins with light sleep, stage 1 and stage 2, where you drift away from waking consciousness, your brain waves slow down, and your body relaxes. From there, you descend into deep sleep, also called slow wave sleep, or stage 3. This is the deepest form of non-REM sleep, characterized by slow, rolling delta waves on an EEG. Your body is deeply relaxed, your heart rate and breathing slow, and it's very difficult to wake you up. After 30 to 40 minutes in deep sleep, you begin to ascend back toward lighter stages, and then, instead of waking, you enter REM sleep. This is the stage where dreaming is most vivid, where your eyes move rapidly beneath your eyelids, and where your brain activity looks almost identical to waking. Your body, however, is paralyzed, except for your diaphragm and eye muscles, so you don't act out your dreams.
After 10 or 15 minutes of REM, the cycle repeats. You descend again into light sleep, then deep sleep, then back up to REM. But here's the key. With each cycle, the proportions change. In the first cycle of the night, you spend a lot of time in deep sleep and only a little in REM. But as the night progresses, deep sleep becomes shorter and REM becomes longer. By the final cycles of the night, you might spend almost no time in deep sleep and 30 to 45 minutes in REM. This progression is not arbitrary. It reflects the different functions of these sleep stages. Deep sleep, which dominates the early night, is when synaptic homeostasis and memory replay happen most intensely. This is when your brain is consolidating the day's experiences, transferring them from hippocampus to cortex, strengthening the important connections and weakening the unimportant ones. This is the foundation work, the reorganization of knowledge. REM sleep, which dominates the late night and early morning hours, is when associative processing and creative exploration happen. This is when your brain, freed from prefrontal constraints, explores unusual connections, tests out new combinations, and occasionally stumbles onto insights. The fact that REM increases toward morning has a profound implication. Your brain's capacity for creative problem-solving peaks in the hours just before you wake up. This explains something you've probably noticed. The most vivid, complex, and memorable dreams tend to occur in the early morning, not the middle of the night. That's because you're spending more time in REM then, and REM dreams are more elaborate and narrative-driven than deep sleep dreams. But it also explains why insights often arrive at the moment of waking or shortly after. You've just come out of an extended period of REM sleep, during which your brain has been exploring the problem space freely, without logical constraints. And then, as you wake, your prefrontal cortex comes back online, and you become consciously aware of what your sleeping brain discovered. This is the convergence point. The sleeping brain does the exploration, and the waking brain becomes aware of the results.
There's another factor at play here too, one that relates to historical sleeping patterns. In pre-industrial societies, before artificial lighting, people often slept in two distinct periods, separated by an hour or two of wakefulness in the middle of the night. This was called first sleep and second sleep, or sometimes watch periods. Historian A. Roger Eckert documented hundreds of references to this pattern in historical texts from medieval and early modern Europe. People would go to bed shortly after dark, sleep for 4 hours or so, wake up for an hour or two, during which they might pray, talk, have sex, or do light chores, and then return to sleep for another 4 hours. What's interesting is that this wakeful period fell right in the middle of the night, when the transition from deep sleep to REM sleep was occurring. And many historical accounts mention that this was a time of particular creativity and reflection. People reported vivid thoughts, unusual ideas, and a sense of mental clarity during these nighttime wakeful periods. This suggests that the boundary between sleep and wake, the transition periods, may be especially conducive to insight. It's not just what happens during deep REM sleep, but also what happens when you're hovering at the edge of sleep, in a state that's neither fully asleep nor fully awake. Modern sleep science has a term for this: hypnagogia, the transition into sleep, and hypnopompia, the transition out of sleep. These are liminal states, threshold states, and they have unique properties that we're only beginning to understand. But before we explore that, there's another piece of the puzzle we need to address. If sleep helps with problem solving, why doesn't it help with all problems equally? Why do some problems get solved during sleep while others don't? What determines which problems your sleeping brain works on?
The answer has to do with emotion, salience, and the hidden prioritization system running in your brain without your awareness. Your brain doesn't process all information equally. If it did, you'd be overwhelmed. Every moment of your life contains vastly more sensory data than you could possibly attend to, let alone remember. So your brain has mechanisms for filtering, for deciding what's important and what isn't. And one of the most powerful filters is emotion. Emotionally arousing experiences are remembered better than neutral ones. This is a well-established finding in psychology, and it makes evolutionary sense. If something made you afraid, or angry, or happy, it probably mattered for your survival or well-being, and you should remember it. Boring, routine experiences can be safely forgotten. This filtering happens at the level of memory encoding during the initial experience, but it also happens during sleep, during memory consolidation. Your brain doesn't replay all memories equally. It prioritizes memories that were emotionally significant. The mechanism involves a small almond-shaped structure deep in your brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is involved in processing emotion, particularly fear and arousal, and it interacts closely with the hippocampus during memory formation. When you experience something emotional, your amygdala activates, and this activation triggers the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. These hormones enhance memory encoding, essentially telling your hippocampus, "This is important, remember this." During sleep, the amygdala remains active, especially during REM sleep. It continues to interact with the hippocampus, and memories that were emotionally tagged during the day are more likely to be replayed and consolidated. The brain, in a sense, is asking, "What mattered today? What do I need to hold on to?"
This has a direct consequence for problem solving during sleep. Your brain is more likely to work on problems that you care about emotionally. If you spent the day working on a problem that frustrated you, that made you anxious, that you felt invested in, your brain is more likely to process that problem during sleep than if you spent the day working on something you found boring or irrelevant. The emotional weight of the problem tags it as important, and your sleeping brain allocates resources to it accordingly. This explains why students often have breakthroughs on exam material that they were stressed about, but don't wake up with insights about trivial homework exercises. It explains why writers, who are emotionally invested in their stories, wake up with plot solutions, but don't wake up with solutions to logistical problems they don't care about. It explains why relationship conflicts, which are almost always emotionally charged, often feel clearer in the morning. Your sleeping brain is not a general-purpose problem solver. It's a selective, priority-driven system that works on what matters to you. This has been demonstrated experimentally. In one study, researchers had people learn 2 tasks, one that was framed as important, they were told their performance would be evaluated and compared to others, and one that was framed as unimportant. After sleep, people showed improvement on the important task, but not on the unimportant one. The emotional framing determined which memory was prioritized for consolidation. Another study looked at targeted memory reactivation during sleep. Researchers had people learn associations between objects and locations, and each object was paired with a specific sound. Then, while the participants slept, the researchers played some of the sounds quietly, without waking them. The sounds that were played during sleep triggered selective reactivation of the associated memories, and those memories were better consolidated than the ones that weren't cued. This shows that even during sleep, the brain can be guided toward processing specific information, and that processing enhances memory. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Emotional salience doesn't just enhance consolidation of existing memories, it also biases the kinds of associations your brain explores during REM sleep. When your brain is in that unconstrained, free associative state during REM, it's not just making random connections, it's exploring connections related to emotionally significant content. If you're worried about a relationship, your brain will explore associations related to relationships. If you're excited about a creative project, your brain will explore associations related to that project. The emotional tagging guides the search space. This is why you often dream about things that are on your mind, things that are causing you stress or excitement. It's not symbolic, as Freud thought. It's your brain allocating processing resources to what matters, using the unique exploratory mode of REM sleep to search for connections that might help resolve the emotional significance. And sometimes it finds them. Sometimes, within the vast network of associations your brain explores during sleep, there is a connection that reframes the problem, that offers a new perspective, that points toward a solution. And that connection, strengthened by repeated exploration over the course of the night, is what surfaces when you wake. But the connection itself is not enough. For you to benefit from it, you need to become aware of it. And that requires understanding what happens at the moment of waking, in that strange transitional state where sleep and consciousness meet. Most insights don't arrive during sleep itself. They arrive in the moments after waking. This timing is crucial, and it points to something important about the nature of consciousness and problem solving. There is a brief period when you first wake up, lasting anywhere from 2 minutes to 10 minutes, when your brain is in a unique state. Sleep researchers call it sleep inertia. Your body is waking up, but your brain hasn't fully transitioned back to waking mode. The prefrontal cortex is sluggish, not yet exerting full executive control. Meanwhile, the hippocampus and other memory regions are still relatively active, still accessible in the way they were during sleep.
And your brain waves reflect this. During sleep inertia, your EEG shows a dominance of theta waves, electrical oscillations in the 4 to 8 Hz range. Theta waves are associated with creativity, insight, and the kind of loose associative thinking that characterizes both dreaming and deep meditative states. They're also present during REM sleep, and they linger for a while after waking. This creates a window of opportunity. You're conscious enough to be aware of your thoughts, to direct your attention, to remember what you're thinking. But you're still close enough to the dream state that the associations your brain was exploring during sleep are accessible. The distant connections, the unusual ideas, the non-logical insights, they're still active in your neural network, not yet suppressed by the prefrontal cortex's return to full function. This is when insights surface. Not during sleep when you have no conscious awareness, but in this liminal zone where consciousness and the dream state overlap. Famous creators have known about this window for centuries, and some have deliberately cultivated it. Thomas Edison famously used a technique to capture ideas from this state. He would sit in a chair holding steel balls in his hands, with metal plates on the floor beneath him. As he began to fall asleep, his hands would relax, the balls would drop and clang on the plates, and the noise would wake him. In that brief moment of awakening, still hovering at the edge of sleep, he would grab a notebook and write down whatever thoughts were in his mind. He believed this hypnagogic state, the transition into sleep, was a source of creative ideas. Salvador Dali used a similar method. He would nap in a chair holding a key over a plate. As he drifted toward sleep, the key would fall, the noise would wake him, and he would immediately sketch whatever surreal images were in his mind. He called this slumber with a key, and he credited it with some of his most iconic imagery.
These techniques work because they exploit the liminal state. Consciousness is present, but the constraints of logical thought are not yet fully re-engaged. The brain is still in an exploratory mode, still accessing the associative networks that were active during sleep. Modern research has confirmed this. Studies show that people woken directly out of REM sleep are more likely to solve insight problems than people woken out of non-REM sleep or people who are fully awake. The REM state, and the brief period after waking from REM, is when creative problem-solving peaks. But there's a catch. This window is brief. Within minutes, your prefrontal cortex fully reactivates and the theta-dominated brain state fades. The door closes. The distant associations that were accessible a moment ago are now suppressed, filtered out, dismissed as irrelevant. You're back in waking mode, with all its logical rigor and all its limitations. This is why it's so important to capture insights immediately upon waking. If you wait, if you get up and start your day, If you let the normal rhythms of waking consciousness take over, the insight may slip away. Not because you forgot it, but because it no longer seems relevant or logical. Your prefrontal cortex, back in control, rejects the idea that seemed so clear a moment ago. How many potential solutions have been lost this way? How many times have you woken with a fleeting sense that you understood something, only to have it dissolve as you fully woke up? The knowledge was there, briefly accessible, but the window closed before you could grasp it. This is one of the reasons why morning routines that allow for gradual waking, that give you time to linger in a quiet, reflective state, are conducive to insight. Jumping out of bed to an alarm, immediately diving into the demands of the day, cuts short the liminal period. But lying still, letting your mind wander, journaling, meditating, these practices extend the window, giving you more time to notice what your sleeping brain discovered.
There's another aspect to this liminal state that's worth considering. It's not just about individual thoughts or solutions, it's about a different mode of knowing. During full waking consciousness, you know things explicitly. You can articulate them, explain them, justify them logically. This is declarative knowledge, the kind you can put into words. But there's another kind of knowing, one that's harder to articulate, more intuitive. You feel that something is right, or that a certain direction is worth pursuing, without being able to fully explain why. This is implicit knowledge, and it's often what emerges from sleep. When you wake up with a solution, it often doesn't come with a full explanation. It's more like a hunch, a sense of direction, a feeling of clarity. The logical justification comes later, as your waking mind works to articulate what your sleeping mind found. But the initial insight is pre-verbal, pre-logical. This is why it can feel magical or mysterious. You don't remember solving the problem. You don't have access to the process your brain went through during sleep. You only have the output, a feeling of knowing, a sense that you understand something you didn't before. And in a way, you're right to feel that it's mysterious, because the process is fundamentally inaccessible to consciousness. Which brings us to one of the most profound aspects of this whole phenomenon. You don't remember how you solved the problem, because the solving happened in a state where memory encoding was largely offline. One of the most striking features of sleep is that you don't remember most of it. You might remember fragments of dreams, particularly from REM sleep close to waking, but the vast majority of your mental activity during sleep is lost. You have no memory of the hours you spent unconscious, no recollection of the neural processes that were running all night.
This isn't an accident, it's a feature of how sleep works. During REM sleep, the hippocampus, which is essential for encoding new episodic memories, memories of events and experiences, is in a strange state. It's highly active, replaying and processing existing memories, but it's not encoding new ones. This is called anterograde amnesia, the inability to form new memories. You're experiencing things, your brain is generating thoughts, emotions, images, narratives, but those experiences aren't being recorded into long-term memory. This is why you don't remember most of your dreams. You had them, you experienced them, but the encoding mechanism was offline, so they vanished the moment they occurred. And the same is true for the problem-solving processes happening during sleep. Your brain was exploring associations, testing combinations, replaying memories, integrating information, but you have no episodic memory of any of it. The process is invisible to you. What you do have, if the process was successful, is the output, a strengthened association, a new connection in your semantic memory network, a pattern that wasn't there before. This is not an episodic memory, a memory of an event, but a change in your knowledge structure. You wake up knowing something, but with no memory of learning it. This is deeply weird if you think about it. You are capable of sophisticated cognition without consciousness and without memory. There is a version of you, a sleeping you, that can think and solve problems, but you have no access to it. You can only infer its existence from its effects. This raises profound questions about the nature of the self. Who is the you that solves problems during sleep? Is it the same you that exists during waking? If you have no memory of the process, no conscious experience of it, in what sense did you do it at all?
Philosophers and neuroscientists have long grappled with these questions.
The emerging view is that consciousness is not a unitary thing, but a collection of processes, most of which happen outside of awareness. The conscious you, the one reading these words, is just one layer, one mode of operation among many. Below it, unconscious systems are constantly running, processing information, making decisions, solving problems. Most of the time, you're not aware of these systems, but occasionally their outputs surface into consciousness, and you experience them as insights, intuitions, gut feelings. Sleep is an extreme case of this, because the conscious layer is completely offline, allowing the unconscious systems to operate without interference. But even during waking, much of what your brain does is unconscious. You're not aware of how you recognize a face, or how you understand a sentence, or how you catch a ball. These are sophisticated computational processes, but they happen automatically, below the threshold of awareness. Problem solving during sleep is just another example of unconscious intelligence. It's more noticeable because the output, the insight, arrives when consciousness returns, creating a stark contrast. I didn't know this before sleep, and now I do. But the underlying principle is the same. Your brain is always doing more than you're aware of. And in the case of sleep, it's actually beneficial that you don't remember the process. If you did, if every associative exploration, every failed connection, every bizarre juxtaposition were encoded into memory, you'd wake up with your head full of noise. The reason sleep-derived insights feel clear and useful is precisely because the irrelevant stuff was discarded, forgotten, memory-encoded in the first place. Only the useful outputs, the successful connections, are transferred into waking memory.
This is another form of selection, another layer of filtering. Just as synaptic homeostasis weakens unimportant connections, anterograde amnesia during sleep prevents unimportant processes from cluttering your memory. You get the result without the mess. But there's a cost, too. The lack of memory means you can't deliberately control the process. You can't decide what problem your sleeping brain will work on, at least not directly. You can't steer the associative explorations. You can't speed it up or slow it down. All you can do is set the stage, by caring about a problem, by thinking about it before sleep, by creating the emotional salience that tags it as important, and then let go, trusting that your unconscious mind will do its work. This requires a kind of surrender, a willingness to step back and let something other than your conscious will take over. And for many people, especially in cultures that highly value conscious control and deliberate effort, this is uncomfortable. We're taught to work hard, to push through, to force solutions into being. The idea that sometimes the best thing to do is nothing, to simply sleep and trust the process, runs counter to deeply held beliefs about productivity and agency. But the science is clear. For certain kinds of problems, this is not only effective, but necessary. Your conscious mind, for all its strengths, has limitations. It operates within logical constraints, within established categories, within the boundaries of what you already believe to be possible. Your unconscious mind, operating during sleep, is free from those constraints. It can explore the impossible, the illogical, the unexpected, and sometimes, hidden within that exploration, is the solution you need. So the amnesia of sleep is not a bug, it's a feature. It protects you from the noise while delivering the signal. It allows a form of cognition that would be impossible if you were aware of it, because awareness itself would constrain it.
And this brings us finally to the question of what this all means. Now that we understand the mechanisms, synaptic homeostasis, memory replay, prefrontal deactivation, associative exploration, emotional prioritization, theta state transitions, and sleep amnesia, what do we do with this knowledge? How does it change the way we think about sleep, about problem solving, about the nature of our own minds? In the end, the story of why you wake up smarter than you fell asleep is a story about trust. It's about trusting a part of yourself that you cannot see, cannot control, cannot even remember. It's about recognizing that intelligence is not limited to conscious, deliberate thought, and that some of the most important work your mind does happens in the dark, in silence, in your absence. We live in a culture that celebrates productivity, that values visible effort, that equates rest with laziness. Sleep is often treated as a necessary evil, something to be minimized, optimized, hacked. We talk about getting by on less sleep, about powering through, about how successful people wake up at 4 a.m. to get more done.
But this perspective misunderstands what sleep is. Sleep is not downtime. It's not wasted hours. It's not the absence of productivity. Sleep is a different kind of work, as essential as waking work, and in some ways more remarkable. During sleep, your brain is reorganizing itself. It's taking the chaotic, overwhelming flood of information from the day and distilling it into knowledge, into understanding, into insight. It's pruning away the noise and amplifying the signal. It's finding patterns you didn't see, making connections you didn't make, solving problems you couldn't solve. It's doing all of this without your conscious involvement, without your effort, without your awareness. And when you wake, you reap the benefits. You're smarter, not because you worked harder, but because you rested. Not because you forced a solution, but because you let go.
This is a profound lesson, one that extends beyond the specific question of problem solving. It's a reminder that there are limits to what conscious effort can achieve, that sometimes the way forward is to stop trying, to step back, to trust that the answer will come if you create the conditions for it. And the conditions are simple. Care about the problem. Engage with it during the day. Let it occupy your mind. Let it matter to you emotionally. This tags it as important, signals to your brain that this is something worth working on. Then let it go. Go to sleep. Don't try to solve it while lying in bed. Don't rehearse arguments. Don't run through scenarios. Don't force your conscious mind to keep working. Just rest. Trust that your sleeping brain, with its unique capabilities, will do what your waking brain cannot. And in the morning, in those first quiet moments, pay attention. Don't rush. Don't immediately reach for your phone. Don't jump into the demands of the day. Linger in that liminal space, that theta wave state where sleep and waking overlap. Notice what thoughts arise. Notice what feels clear. And if an insight comes, capture it immediately, before the prefrontal cortex fully reactivates and dismisses it as illogical. This is not magic. This is biology, neuroscience, the evolved architecture of your brain. But it feels like magic, doesn't it? To go to sleep confused and wake up clear. To struggle all day and then, without trying, find the answer in the morning. It feels like a gift, a moment of grace. And maybe that's what it is. Not grace in a supernatural sense, but grace in the sense of something given freely, something you didn't earn through effort, but received through surrender. Your sleeping brain is an ally you didn't know you had, a partner in the work of understanding the world. It asks only that you trust it, that you give it time, that you care enough about the problems you face to make them worth solving.
And it delivers. Not every night, not for every problem, but often enough that cultures across the world, across centuries, have noticed and enshrined it in wisdom. Sleep on it. The answer will come in the morning. Because it will. Because your brain is working, even when you're not. Because intelligence is deeper than consciousness. Because you are, in a very real sense, smarter when you're asleep than when you're trying to be smart. This reframes sleep entirely. It's not a break from thinking. It's a different kind of thinking. It's not a pause in problem solving. It's when some of the most important problem solving happens. It's not time lost. It's time invested in a process that cannot happen any other way. And this has practical implications. If you're facing a decision, a creative challenge, a problem that feels intractable, the research is clear. Give yourself a night. Don't decide immediately. Don't force it. Sleep first. Let your brain do what it does best, in the conditions where it does it best. This is especially true for problems that require insight, that involve seeing things from a new angle, that need creative rather than logical solutions. These are the problems where sleep helps most, where the removal of prefrontal constraints allows your brain to explore possibilities that would be dismissed during waking thought. But even for more straightforward problems, sleep helps. Memory consolidation strengthens what you've learned, making it easier to access and apply. Synaptic homeostasis clarifies the patterns, making the important information stand out.
Emotional processing integrates your experiences, giving you a clearer sense of what matters. Sleep makes you better at almost everything: learning, memory, decision-making, emotional regulation, creativity, problem-solving. The list goes on. And yet, we treat it as optional, as something to sacrifice when we're busy, as a luxury we can't afford.
We have it backwards. Sleep is not a luxury, it's a necessity, as fundamental as food or water. And treating it as such, prioritizing it, protecting it, respecting it, is one of the most important things you can do for your cognitive health, your emotional well-being, and your capacity to understand the world. There's also a deeper, more philosophical implication. The fact that your unconscious mind can solve problems, can think in ways that your conscious mind cannot, challenges our everyday sense of who we are. We identify with our conscious selves, with the voice in our head, with the deliberate, aware thinker. But that's not the whole story. Below the surface, unconscious systems are constantly at work, processing information, guiding behavior, generating insights. You are not just your conscious self. You are the whole system, conscious and unconscious together. And the unconscious is not inferior, not a primitive relic to be overcome by rational thought. It's different, with its own strengths, its own logic, its own ways of knowing. Sometimes it knows things your conscious mind doesn't. Sometimes it sees connections your waking awareness misses. Sometimes it solves problems that conscious effort cannot touch. Learning to work with your unconscious mind, to create conditions where it can do what it does best, is a skill. And sleep is one of the primary ways to access that skill. So tonight, as you prepare for sleep, consider this. You're not just going to rest. You're not just recovering from the day. You're entering a state where a different kind of intelligence takes over, where your brain will reorganize itself, explore possibilities, and work on the problems that matter to you. You're trusting a process that has been honed over millions of years of evolution, a process that every sleeping human, every sleeping mammal, every sleeping creature participates in.
And in the morning, you might wake up knowing something you didn't know before. Not because someone taught you, not because you reasoned it out, but because your brain, in the darkness, found a way. This is the mystery and the beauty of sleep. It's a reminder that we are not as in control as we think, that intelligence is not limited to consciousness, that the mind is deeper and stranger and more capable than our everyday experience suggests. You wake up smarter than you fell asleep because your brain never stopped working. It just changed how it worked, shifting from the focused, logical, constrained mode of waking consciousness to the loose, exploratory, unconstrained mode of sleep. Both are necessary, both are valuable, and together they create the full range of human intelligence. So sleep well, trust the process, trust the darkness, trust the part of yourself that works in silence, that solves problems without your awareness, that delivers insights in the quiet moments of morning, because it's working for you, right now, tonight, every night. And when you wake, you'll be different. Subtly, perhaps, but different. A little clearer, a little wiser, a little smarter than you were when you closed your eyes. And that difference, accumulated over nights and weeks and years, is part of what makes you who you are, part of your growth, your understanding, your capacity to navigate the world. Sleep is not a break from being yourself. It's an essential part of how you become yourself. In the end, we return to where we began, the simple, everyday miracle of waking with an answer. Now you know why it happens. Now you understand the symphony of neural processes, the cycling through sleep stages, the replay of memories, the loosening of associations, the theta waves at dawn, the convergence of sleep processing and waking awareness.
But knowing the mechanism doesn't diminish the wonder. If anything, it deepens it. The fact that your brain can do all of this automatically, without your conscious involvement, without your effort, is astonishing. You are a biological system capable of solving problems in your sleep, capable of reorganizing knowledge without awareness, capable of becoming smarter through rest. And that's something worth marveling at, something worth respecting, something worth trusting. As you drift off tonight, know that your mind will continue its work in the darkness. The problems you face today, the questions you couldn't answer, the challenges that seemed insurmountable, your brain will take them, turn them over, explore them from angles you haven't considered, and perhaps, if the conditions are right, find a way through. Sleep well, rest deeply, trust the process. And in the morning, when light returns and consciousness rekindles, pay attention to that first quiet moment. Notice what's different. Notice what's clear. Notice what you know now that you didn't know before. Because you will wake up smarter than you fell asleep. You always do.